I just want to take a few minutes to tell you about next week. And I should also say a little bit about this week. It's been wonderful. The spirit on the vigil line, and we've been getting our act together. The meeting today at noon was just really special, a sharing between all of us. And I really encourage you, if you haven't already been with us, to try to find the time to join us for a day out in front of the courthouse and out at General Electric, and to join us in our simple, modest meals at dinner and also at lunch. It's been really special. It's going to continue next week. None of us had really thought this was going to happen when we started. But every night we'll be back here again, and there'll be a whole crew of speakers and musicians in again. Monday night, Ekbal Ahmad, who is here with us, will be back again from the Institute for Policy Study, and also John Dudgeon, who is here also with us once before. Tuesday night, George Wall, who's a Nobel laureate in physiology, will be with us to talk about his perspectives on the arms race, and also brother Fred Kirkpatrick from New York City will be here, fine singer. And it's going to go on and on and on. And this is just the beginning for all of us. We'll start every day. No, I didn't mean it that way. We're going to start every day, try to start at 9 o'clock, and we're going to have our religious service with some silence and readings and singing perhaps together at 9 o'clock in the morning instead of at noon. And then around 9:15, we'll go out and be at the courthouse.
I'd also like to say publicly hello to Bill and Molly Rush, though I think they've left. We're old friends from Pittsburgh since 1969, and I've seen them often in Pittsburgh, but it's nice to see them here in the Philadelphia area. You know, it was about 10 years ago this month, exactly 10 years ago this month, when 8 people were indicted in a little place also not too far from here called Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Phil Berrigan was one of those 8, and they were charged by the United States federal government for plotting to kidnap Henry Kissinger and to destroy the heating tunnels in the Washington underground system. As you know, it was because of their opposition to the Vietnam War, their opposition to that racist genocide in Southeast Asia that led other people to oppose the war in Southeast Asia, that our government, your government, and my government came down on 8 individuals 10 years ago this month. Those people were charged with kidnapping and attempted bombing when the only kidnapping going on in that year was what the government was doing in Southeast Asia by taking people out of cities and forcing them into concentration camps, into work camps, so that they could no longer be targets for the bombing that would go on by the Americans in the countries of Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. That was the bombing and the kidnapping that took place in 1971, but 8 individuals were charged with conspiracy. This time we have 8 more individuals. Again, there are some people who were there 10 years ago and here 10 years from then. And this time they're charged with destroying nuclear weapons in opposition to nuclear weapons. And this time the government, your government and my government, only this time in a state way, is bringing charges against individuals because of their capability, their moral leadership, to continue resistance to what the government has still not learned in terms of how to make peace and how to provide for people. And therefore, continuing their arms race is going to require that no matter what happens this week, no matter what happens in that courtroom in Norristown, and no matter what happens to those 8 individuals, you can be sure that 10 years from now, and 10 years from then, not just in this town, but in towns across this country and across the world, there are going to be people who are going to do the very same thing. And it might be one of you in this room tonight. It might be one of you for the first time hearing information about the nuclear arms race, for the first time being inspired by people who have courage, who will be 10 years from this February, 1981, in the same situation because of what you've learned this week and what you're about to learn as you watch this government. Our resistance will continue. We have learned much since 1971, since the Harrisburg indictment of the Harrisburg 8. We are going to learn more from the indictment of the Plowshares 8, and we are going to continue. But we have to realize that our government has not yet learned the lessons of what happened 10 years ago, is not learning the lessons of what is happening right in front of it now. 10 years ago, our government said, well, we have to ask the American people to sacrifice their people, our children, to fight a genocidal, racist, immoral war in Southeast Asia. Our government was asking us to sacrifice so that it could commit that atrocity in Indochina. They even told us that they had to destroy cities in order to save them, that they had to bomb Hue, the ancient city citadel of Saigon, near Saigon. They had to bomb Da Nang in order to save it. They had to bomb Cam Ranh Bay in order to save it. They had to bomb Southeast Asia in order to save it because there were people there, Vietnamese, Cambodians, and Laotians, that didn't want the system that our government was putting in Indochina. So we had to destroy them and their cities to save it from another system that they wanted. We were bombing cities in order to save them. Isn't that ridiculous? And isn't that exactly what we're doing now, 10 years from the Harrisburg indictment? Isn't that what we're doing as we see the decline of our people and the decline of our society? We are destroying our cities in the name of national security, in the name of saving it for American corporate capitalism, because there are people benefiting from this arms race. And aren't we bombing the South Bronx in order to save it? Aren't we bombing Watts in order to save it? Aren't we bombing Philadelphia, Los Angeles, Miami, Houston, San Francisco in order to save these cities as the arms race and its budget continues to skyrocket and the needs of our people are being cut left and right? 10 years ago, the sacrifice was in terms of our children and the millions of people of Southeast Asia, yellow-skinned people. This time, the sacrifice falls heavily on poor people, on minority people, on Chicanos, Hispanics, black people in this country. The white privileged and elite class in this society benefited, it thought, and attempted to, from the war in Vietnam, and is trying to benefit again from the arms race. And it's causing the anger and the frustration here in our country, which will deepen racial tensions, class tensions, frustration, and unrest, just like we saw in Southeast Asia. Our country is asking us to sacrifice so that it continues with this arms race, that we will experience the inflation, the unemployment, the cuts in social programs. But we're here tonight to say that we are not unwilling to sacrifice. We are people who will sacrifice, but we will not sacrifice for the goals of this government. We sacrifice so that Jimmy Carter and Ronald Reagan can continue their Presidential Directive 59. We will not sacrifice so that we build over 3 nuclear bombs every 24 hours in Pantex, Texas. We will sacrifice by marching in these streets. We will sacrifice by fasting. We will sacrifice by going to jail. We will sacrifice the consequences of speaking out to this nation's government for what it is, and that's the kind of sacrificing that we will do. We will no longer sacrifice for the goals that this government puts before us. And that's what people said at King of Prussia in September of 1980. That's what they were being struggled with in February of 1971. That is the kind of sacrifice and statement that I think will be made in the Norristown court, and that's why we're here to support them. On November 4th of last year, our country elected another nuclear warhead, Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan was the 8th president of the United States since this country dropped 2 atomic bombs in Japan on August 6th and August 9th, 1945. He continues the nuclear insanity of Truman, Eisenhower, Kennedy, Johnson, Nixon, Ford, Carter, and Reagan. If anybody should be indicted for destruction of property, if anybody should be indicted for assault on property and people, if anybody should be indicted for murders and kidnapping, it should be the White House 8 of Truman, Eisenhower, Kennedy, Johnson, Nixon, Ford, Carter, and Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan, his litany of atrocities will be with us for as long as we live and will definitely outlast his 4-year, hopefully less, administration. That doesn't mean he has to die. That just means he has to be removed. Ronald Reagan has asked for an increase of Jimmy Carter's military budget, which would in next year be $196 billion. Ronald Reagan wants $26 billion more on top of that, for a total of $221 billion for the Department of Defense for the year beginning October 1st, 1981, and going until October 1st, 1982. We would have had enough with Jimmy Carter, who promised military cuts as a candidate in 1976. His military budget went beyond Ford's. Had Ford stayed in office, he never cut the military budget. Ronald Reagan, in this hysteria about the Soviet Union, in this appeal to fear and communism and its problems that we are supposed to understand and hate, to this appeal to our insecurities based on national security, is saying, I am going to cut every other social program that you're aware of for the sake of the military budget. And he wants $221 billion for the next fiscal year, an increase of $26 billion over what Jimmy Carter would have had he stayed in office. A week and a half ago, you saw Ronald Reagan on television addressing the joint session of the House and Senate, talking about the social programs that he is going to slash. Do you realize that with that $26 billion increase for military outlays for fiscal year 1982, that $26 billion would fund every one of the programs that Ronald Reagan is slashing and is asking Congress to support, which we have to stop, and we still would have $1.5 billion left after using what the Pentagon is going to get next year at the expense of, and this is the list, food stamps, a cut of $1.9 billion, child nutrition, $1.7 billion, aid to families with dependent children, $500 million, Medicaid, $1.3 billion, National Institutes of Health, $200 million, Student Assistant, $1 billion, Youth Conservation Corps, Youth Adult Conservation Corps, Vocation Education, $500 million, Comprehensive Employment and Training, $4.7 billion, Trade Adjustment, $1.5 billion, International Aid, $1.9 billion, Consumer Protection, $360 million, Amtrak subsidies, $500 million, and the list goes on and on and on. This administration is going to continue the reality that this country is first in military power, first in military strength, while we rank 15th in literacy, 20th in doctor-patient ratio, 13th in infant mortality, and 9th in life expectancy. Ronald Reagan, the 8th nuclear warhead, the 8th nuclear wonder of the world, is going to bring with him such aggravated social unrest in this country that it will make periods before this look tame and mild in comparison. The American people, and again, especially poor, low income, black, brown, and red, and other minorities and third world people who live in this country are going to pay dearly for this. They're going to pay more than you and I are going to pay for it, and you and I are going to also pay very heavily. With the inflation and the unemployment and the inability to put food on a table, we're going to have virtually chaos and frustration in every social sector of the society where these impacts are felt. Again, nobody in the Soviet Union is asking for the arms race based on the same reasons that our country is doing so. They do not have a corporate system which profits off an arms race the way our corporations do and control this society. And nobody in the Joint Chiefs of Staffs or the Pentagon would trade places with their counterparts in the Soviet Union because they know we're ahead of them. We have more nuclear weapons, we have more capability, we have an incredible strategy to destroy the Soviet Union, and yet they're telling us that we have to increase the billion-dollar defense budget by another $26 billion so that those companies can continue their profits and you and I will pay. Watch Ronald Reagan. He's talking about freezing the federal employment so that we will cut jobs and save the taxpayers money. He is threatening to cut the federal payroll by 43,000 jobs this year, 1981, and will cut the federal program by 83,000 jobs in 1982. That is what you're going to hear a lot about, the way Reagan is whittling down the federal bureaucracy and cutting these jobs. What you don't realize is that he is increasing the Pentagon payroll by 14,000 new jobs, and in 1982, 20,000 more jobs in the Pentagon, and in 1983, another 20,000 jobs in the Pentagon. So the shift is going away from social programs, very, very clearly into the military budget. It is clear to us that the Reagan administration and that this government is not able to make peace. It cannot make peace by preparing for war, and preparing for war is what this government does, and does very well, I might add. Not just with more military aid to the junta in El Salvador, not just with military arms to Saudi Arabia and Israel, not just with corporate loans and financial support to the racist regime in South Africa and its apartheid, and to other dictatorships and racist repressive regimes around the country. This country is asking you and I to sacrifice not just with the threat of war and inflation and unemployment, it is asking you to accept the sacrifice of the threat of annihilation. Because high on the agenda of these policymakers in Washington is winning a nuclear war with the Soviet Union. And it's too bad that we don't have somebody like a Dan Ellsberg in the Pentagon right now who could release what the real strategies are in the Pentagon, the way he did with the Pentagon Papers in 1971. Because we probably know 10 to 15% of what's going on in that building. And if we would know the rest of it, it may shake more Americans up to realize that if you and I don't start making the peace, nobody's going to do it for us. This country has changed its nuclear warfighting strategy to one that is about attacking and destroying the Soviet Union. It is building new weapons like the Trident submarine, like the MX missile, like the cruise missile, like the Mark 12A warhead, so that we can destroy the Soviet Union so effectively that it will not be able to retaliate, and therefore we can win a nuclear war. The decline in U.S. power is going so far down that they're thinking of nuclear war as the solution. It's going so far up that there are experts who believe that some form of nuclear war and even a nuclear holocaust is inevitable within the next 5 to 15 years. Our previous strategy, as you may know, was called mutual assured destruction, MAD, MAD for short. The principle was that if one country tried to attack the other, the first country would be destroyed and therefore wouldn't launch the attack. Under that situation, MAD, 140 million Americans would be killed in a 24-hour period. The Soviets would lose 110 million in the same period, and there would be others in other countries and those countries who would die from radiation blast, pollution, and other effects of nuclear war. The list would go on and on. Our strategy now is to destroy the first strike capability of the Soviet Union, as Carter so boldly released on August 6, 1980, preceding the Democratic Convention, the 35th anniversary of the destruction of Hiroshima. We are boasting of PD-59. I don't know if you saw about PD-58, but it was about making sure the White House was made safe in the event of a nuclear war. PD-59 is to destroy those capabilities of the Soviet Union so they will not be able to retaliate, possible with this first strike capability when these weapons are built and they're scheduled to be online in 1989, that we can kill up to 200 million Soviets in the same short period. As hard as we try to destroy their retaliation, they can still strike back. And according to the Pentagon and the Office of Technology Assessment, they can kill 30 to 50 million American citizens. And when James Schlesinger, who really organized the presidential directive in 1974, when he made it public, was questioned, do you think it is worth 30 to 50 million American lives to win a nuclear war with the Soviet Union? His one word, simple answer, on January 10th, 1974, was yes. This is the same policy that the Reagan administration will not only continue, but will expand. We'll accelerate the Trident, we'll accelerate the MX, we'll accelerate the cruise, and build more weapons. And you and I are being asked to sacrifice, and this time we're going to be asked to accept nuclear war. We are saying no, and we are going to make the peace. We have to realize that since the end of the Vietnam War, there's been a movement growing in this country for disarmament that is getting stronger and stronger, with peace movements, environmental groups, churches, labor groups, minority organizations, women's groups, public interest, professional, scientific, and others who are learning that the arms race is the key to saving this economy and to making sure that we don't make it impossible for our children not to live. That this is also growing internationally, in Japan, in Europe, in Australia. There have even been dialogues with members of people from the Soviet Union's organizations like the Soviet Peace Committee, where a different society in ours is organized. Their peace committee often interprets and supports Soviet foreign policy, but it is understood in both countries that there has to be reconciliation and a normalization of relationships between these two societies in order to prevent nuclear war. We are seeing Nobel Prize winners like Esquivel from Argentina because of his human rights, and Mother Teresa in India because of her humility and the care for the poor, accepting the Nobel Peace Prize in Oslo, saying that the biggest problem in the world today is the arms race. And we are fighting a public opinion battle, which means a lot of organizing must go on, a lot of education, a lot of demonstrations, and a lot of vigils. I would just like to suggest that things people can do in the next future, now and for the next several months, are many, and it's up to you to decide how much you want to do it by yourself or as a group. It's definitely important to notify your representatives in Washington, senators and congresspeople. It's important to write letters to the newspapers and to call radio and TV talk shows and build a climate that will be more conducive for stopping the arms race than allowing the insanity and the rhetoric coming from Washington to pollute the minds of the American people. I'm convinced, just as happened with Vietnam and the B-1 campaign and other issues, when the American people see 2 points of view, they know which one makes sense and which one is more honest, and they can decide. They can not only decide, they can join campaigns to make some of those goals realizable. On March 28th in Harrisburg, people will be demonstrating to end nuclear power, and there is a connection between nuclear power and nuclear weapons that must be understood. People should really go in the bus loads, in the car loads, on the bus, hitchhike, whatever it takes to get to Harrisburg on Saturday, March 28th, try and show up. The American Friends Service Committee and other organizations is calling for locally coordinated actions at nuclear weapons facilities all over the country on Saturday, April 25. If you live near a facility, and if you know, I can't think of anything. If you know of a federal building or a military installation or anything that presents itself as U.S. militarism, go and organize and demonstrate near it, by it, leaflet it, picket it, talk to the workers, talk to the citizens in that community on Saturday, April 25. We have to stop the arms race quickly, and we have to stop it fast. And I think fasting is a way to show our moral grounds for opposing what we do, as well as trying to understand ourselves better. And I would like to ask you to join me, and I hope hundreds of other people, this August 6th through 9th for a 3-day fast, because it is clear our government is not going to support people who are hungry with cuts in food stamps, and therefore it's going to be more incumbent upon us. I'm asking you to join in a 3-day fast against the arms race, a Stop the Arms Race fast, using the dual sense of that word, and the money that you won't use to eat to give to a program that needs funded, because there are lots of them, and there are lots of programs like Oxfam, like the Catholic churches, that are trying to feed poor people in this country and the world. And finally, let me just say, on writing Congress and senators and representatives, the American Security Council is trying to take advantage of this tidal wave of anti-Sovietism and military hysteria, and is asking the Congress in June of this year to pass a resolution which says that the United States must have military superiority over the Soviet Union. Believe me, if this is passed, it'll be just like the Gulf of Tonkin resolution in 1964, when Congress said it was okay for the president to use his war powers to intervene in North Vietnam. That was the justification for a lot of things in terms of what we did in Southeast Asia. It is important to prevent the passage of this resolution in Congress in June by notifying your representative to prohibit the Congress from passing this Military Superiority Act and calling for reductions in the arms race and eventual disarmament. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Terry. Let's not even pause for breath. We have Barbara Zanotti here from Boston, and she's done a lot of work with Mobilization for Survival, and she's got some more things to say to us on peacemaking tonight.